I know it's actually after Halloween, but we're still talking about October, so I'm not taking my spooky decorations down yet. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brie and this is For Positive Book. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my October books. Everything that I read in October. It was a pretty good month. I think that I read a lot. I read a lot for vlogs, so I will direct you to the content when I get to those books so that you get my live in-depth thoughts as we go through. But I really like doing wrap-ups. For me personally, it bookends the month and I kind of get to wrap everything up and put it in a bow. And for those of you that are not vlog watchers, you'll still get to hear my thoughts on my recent reads. So the way that I do my wrap-ups is I will talk about the nerdy stats first, you know, how much I read, how many pages I read, what kind of genres, that kind of stuff. And then I will talk about the books from the book that I liked the least to the book that I liked the most, ending with my 5-star read. So I read 16 books in the month of October. I also DNF'd an extra one, so we're going to be talking about 17 books today. That's a total page count of 6,373 pages. No, I did not read those all physically. I do a lot of my reads on audio, which is why I'm able to read so much in a month, but I never track the hours that I listen to an audiobook. I just do it by page count. So I read 7 books solely on audio. I read 1 book physically, 1 book on ebook, and 7 books a mixture of something. So I was immersion reading it. I was like picking it up on Kindle and then listening to it on audio, a mixture of things. That's just what that means. I had 15 novels and 1 novella, and all 16 of those books were targeted at an adult age range. I am definitely transitioning out of YA and middle grade. I do not read that much anymore, and this is just going to be a trend that's going to happen going forward. As far as my ratings, they were all over the place. So I did not have any 1, 1.5, or 2-star reads. However, I did have a 2.5-star read. I had 4 3-star reads, 3 3.5-star reads, 6 4-star reads, which is exciting. But I only had a 1 4.5-star read and 1 5-star read. So we definitely are lacking in the 5-star all-time favorites. But personally, a 5-star read for me is like a favorite, right? It's hard to get a 5-star read for me. I don't do 6 stars, so 5 stars is the ultimate, the best. Which means that a 4-star rating is still pretty good, and it's still a book that I highly recommend. For genres, it's spooky season, okay? So I read a lot of horror. I read 9 horror books. I also read 3 fantasy romance books. I read 3 thrillers and 1 romance. Although technically that one was like a witchy romance. It wasn't like contemporary, but I didn't feel like it was enough romantasy to be under that category. Those are the stats. Let's talk about the books. We're going to start with the book that I DNF'd. That was The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. I read less than 200 pages of this book, so like take this with a grain of salt, but I didn't care about this book. I didn't care about what was going on. I was feeling like I was skimming it and I was just not invested in the characters. And then the dog like got away and they presumed that it was dead and I was done. I couldn't do that. So I DNF'd this one. T. Kingfisher is so hit or miss for me because there are some books that I really, really love from her. And then there are some that just do not work with me. So I don't know what to do about the future of my relationship with T. Kingfisher. Moving on to my 2.5-star reads, and this was another disappointment. That was The Vacation by John Mars. I've given every single one of his books 4.5 or 5 stars this year, okay? And I've read several of them. So this one hurt a lot, but I can tell that this is definitely one of his older books and his writing has vastly improved since this. There is a large cast of characters, but you don't care about any of them. They all feel so two-dimensional. They don't feel like they have their own unique experiences or development or anything like that. And so when things started happening to our characters, I didn't know who was who, and so I didn't know like who I was supposed to care about. It also kept jumping back and forth between our present day timeline and then a bunch of different past timelines, and I was really confused. Beyond that, the narrator, there was only 1 narrator, which I know like happens, but it made it even harder to tell the characters apart, if that makes any sense. So yeah, this was a really, really big disappointment. Not saying that I'm done with John Mars. Obviously, I have loved his other stuff. There will be times where you just don't love an author's book every time. Moving on to my 3-star reads. I had 4 of them. All of them were in different vlogs, so I will point you in that direction. The first ones that I'm going to be talking about are from the TBR Harvest vlog. The first one was Pumpkin Spice and Poltergeist by Allie K. Mulford. This is a sapphic witchy rom-com. This is about a girl who accidentally summons the ghost of her old girlfriend or her ex-girlfriend. She had died in a car accident the year before. It was the anniversary of her death, and she wanted closure. She wanted like an explanation, stuff like that. And then she gets stuck. The poltergeist gets stuck until our main character can move on and she can be with a new person. Sounds really cute, but there was like this weird mystery thing that was also happening. It was also super, super fast. We really leaned into the U-Haul lesbian trope a lot. Witchy rom-coms are not necessarily my cup of tea, but this was a book that was given to me as an ARC. It's cute. If you like a witchy rom-com, this one's going to work for you. It definitely has that cozy, like Gilmore Girls type of vibe to it, but with magic. And if that sounds up your alley, then this is going to work for you. But for me, it was just kind of middle of the road. In that vlog, I also read So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. This is her newest book, and it is about these two girls who go off to New York City, I believe. She's basically in her midlife crisis, which I really appreciate when Rachel Harrison writes the older main characters. You don't see that enough, okay? Most authors will write characters in their like late 20s and call them an adult novel, and I like the idea of having older main characters. I feel like I could relate to her on a lot of levels where she just like didn't know where her life was going. Everything that she had thought was going for her really wasn't. And her husband sends her and her friend off to New York to like have a birthday weekend, to have a girls trip. Come to find out, and this is not a spoiler, but her husband just wanted her out of the house so that he could have an affair. Anyways, they go to this party with some questionable characters, turns out to be vampires, and shenanigans start from there. This book just didn't go far enough for me. I read Black Sheep last year and absolutely loved it. I felt like the cult vibes were 100% there. I felt like it went dark. It was a bonkers book. And this one, I was kind of hoping for the same thing. We have these mysterious secret society of vampires, and like we could have done a lot with that, and I wish we would have explored that a little bit more. But instead we had this like weird friendship between her and her friend where like I thought we were gonna have this sapphic relationship, and that would have been also cool, but we didn't get that. It was platonic. The main character's friend felt very immature, and so then I forgot that they were older main characters because the friend was acting like she was in high school. So it was just kind of, the book was just messy. Obviously, as a romantasy lover, I did love the little romance that was happening, that was starting to build, but yeah, overall this book was just messy. My next 3-star read came from my seasonal spooky challenge vlog, and that was Sign Here by Claudia Lux. I loved half of this book, and then the other half of it felt like it was out of place. This is about a demon named Peyote, and he has to get a human to give up their soul so that he can like level up, that he can get a promotion. And that part was absolutely hilarious. There were such interesting quirks and descriptions of what hell was, and like the author took a lot of creative liberty, which was fun. It was things like the bar in hell only serves the Jägermeister, and the only radio station that works is the genre of music that grinds your gears. So you know, just really unfortunate things. And that part was so fun. But then we had these other POV characters where it was this like really rich family, which, you know, like I don't love rich family problems. But anyways, this family going off to a summer house, there was like a lot of drama with that family. And obviously eventually like they tie together, the stories interconnect. So it made sense, but it ended up just being a little bit of like a too little too late situation. I didn't care enough by the point of the story where we figured out why the two stories were connected. And then the ending felt really Matt Haig and kind of out of the blue. It was very much like a life is what you make of it kind of thing. And like, I don't know, that just didn't feel on theme with the rest of the book. So it was a fun time. Like, it was a very unique premise, but not a favorite for me, unfortunately. Then my final 3-star read was during my week of Scatagorathon, and that was The Stars Are Dying by Chloe C. Penaranda. Could be saying that name wrong, I do apologize. Listen, I'm keeping this book because it's gorgeous, but it was only 3 stars for me. It's not a series that I really want to continue. This book was so boring. So boring. Nothing happened, but the magic was so interesting. The concept was so cool, but dear God, these characters were as flimsy as a wet paper towel. And they were about as interesting as one too. I just wanted some banter here, but we didn't get that. We didn't get that. I actually felt more for the friend than I did for the love interest. And I was like, maybe we can make this a sapphic. Nope, just kidding. We're gonna do that to that character. Cool, love that. Very disappointed in this book. I mean, I won't want to say disappointed because this isn't necessarily a book that I had a lot of expectations for. It's not even a book that I really had on my radar, but I was given the audio arc from NetGalley, and so like I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. And then I noticed that it was getting a really pretty cover, and listen, you know me, I'm a sucker for the sprayed edges and the special editions. This isn't even really a special edition, it's just a first edition. I'm a sucker for those and I buy them every time. And I'm disappointed most of the times. I should really learn from that, but will I? No. This is about our main character who has to go through this series of trials. And again, like that sounds like it could be cool, but nothing was really ever explained well enough for me to understand or really connect with the character. And I felt like every time we had something happen, the stakes weren't high enough, right? We should be having life or death stakes. If you think about something like Serpent and the Wings of Night, like that feels like really high stakes. So 3 stars. The writing was really pretty though. I will give it that. Like she definitely has some really pretty prose, but I don't know how much of that helped the book and how much of it hurt, because a lot of times when you get those really like that really prosy writing, then you tend to become detached from the characters, and maybe that is also a reason why I didn't connect with them. Moving on to my 3.5 star reads. The first one I didn't vlog. That's a first. That was A Shadow in the Ember by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the first book in the From Blood and Ash prequel series. I think it's a Flesh and Fire. I am desperately trying to catch up on all of the Romantasy series that I think one of the books will be in the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I do think that book 4 in this series will be on there, which means that I have 2 more to read before that one. This book I'm struggling with because I actually really liked From Blood and Ash, and Jennifer L. Armentrout can write banter, right? So like maybe she needs to teach Chloe something. This has so much banter in it, and it has a prickly main character. She's an assassin. She is stabby. She like kind of can take care of herself and like is just choosing to let this person also into her life, even though she's supposed to kill him. Whoops. Listen, I do love that trope. I do love that trope. However, this book was so bloated, so overwritten, and I just kind of was like, okay, can we get to the point? Can we get to the end? Can we like just move forward, right? Because there were parts that I absolutely loved in this book, and I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be like another 5-star series for me. I don't know. But then there were just parts that was just like, oh my god, move on. We've talked about this already. We've already settled this. And so yeah, we're coming in at 3.5. I also kind of agree with a lot of the reviews that are on Goodreads that this feels kind of like a copy paste to From Blood and Ash, which I'm hoping will like kind of diminish as I go along in the series, because From Blood and Ash is the only one that I read from the first series. I'm only going to be catching up on the prequels. I'm not going to try to catch up on all of the series. I cannot do that. I do not have time. So I kind of can see that. However, at the same time, like I can also see that this is reminiscent of other Romantasy books, or other Romantasy books are reminiscent of this one. We're all just looking at tropes, right? We're all just kind of playing to a trope and changing it a little bit. So yes, like, is it weird that the same author is writing the same kind of storyline several hundred years apart? Maybe a little bit, but I can kind of like maybe see where she's going with it. So I'm not super mad about it, but I can see the critique. The other 2 I did vlog. So the first one was Ghost Camera by Darcy Coates. This one I read during my seasonal spooky challenge for the blood on the cover prompt. And this is a series of short stories and a novella. The novella is actually one of her first books that she ever published. And she kind of has this rule that she doesn't go back and read her old stuff because she'll want to like forever edit it, and then like nothing new will come out. So please don't do that, Darcy, because we do want some new stuff. But for this one she did make an exception. So then she republished it. She did some minor edits and then added some short stories to it as well. Obviously with the collection of short stories, there's going to be ones that I really enjoy and ones that I don't necessarily as much, or they just feel a little bit forgetful. I didn't hate any of these. In fact, I actually think that the title novella was probably the weakest of all of them, which kind of makes sense if it is her first one. It felt a little bit juvenile, it felt a little bit YA, but there were some in here that I absolutely loved. I can't remember the title of it, but the one where she's in a plane crash and it's like a survival story, that one I think was probably my favorite. And there weren't any in here that like I hated. There was just a lot of like mediocre ones that I didn't necessarily like. I don't remember that much, honestly. Overall, another win for Darcy. Short story collections are not always my favorite when I'm reading them, especially when they're like all from one author. I don't know, I feel like as soon as we like start getting into the meat of a story, it's over. Like with that plane crash one, I absolutely loved it, but also I want an entire story about that. So we're settling at a 3.5 star read, and this is the first of 5 Darcy Coates books that we're going to be talking about in today's wrap up. I also gave 3.5 stars to You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. I read The Homes Where the Bodies Are last month for the Spooky Challenge and absolutely loved it. So I kind of wanted to go back and read some more of her books. And this one is such a weird book. As someone who has historically read a lot of romance books, this book is that fine line between a romance and a thriller, because when you read a lot of dark romances, there are questionable things that happen. And it's just a matter of, do you as the reader, and also does the main character think what the love interest is doing is cute and sexy, or is it creepy and stalkery? And that, the answer to that question is where you will find like what genre a book fits into. If you think of like There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark, right? That's like a stalker romance. It's crazy, but like it's sexy, so it's romance. This is about a character who goes to an Airbnb in the middle of Wyoming, I think, question mark, somewhere in the middle of nowhere to kind of clear her head, right? She needs to just get away. The person who owns the Airbnb also lives at that house, and so they actually like kind of start forming this cute little relationship, and he is kind of like this golden retriever guy. He's saying all the right things, he's doing all the right things, but because you know it's a thriller, you are very much on edge while reading this book because you can't trust anybody. If this was a romance, I would be like, oh, he's so cute. He's teaching her how to fish. He's teaching her how to do these things. Like it's a cowboy romance waiting to happen. But because I know that this is a thriller, something is off, right? I don't know what yet, but something is off. And so then the friends start coming in, the other townspeople start coming in, and you're very on edge. And I think that's what made this book so great, because you didn't know where to who to trust, if you should trust anyone. Answer, nobody. My struggle with this book came at the end. I think that it happened so fast. Like everything went off the rails and then we were done. It was just like, okay, that's it. We're done. Okay, goodbye. Move on to the next book. And Homes Where the Bodies Are kind of has that as well, but I felt like the pacing built up to that climax a little bit better. And so it's just it goes to show you that her writing has improved. I gave 3 Darcy Coates books 4 stars. I did them in two different vlogs, and then one of them I didn't vlog. So we're going to talk about all of them together. The first one being Silence in the Shadows. This is the 4th and final book in the Voices in the Snow quartet. I guess it's 4 books. I'm really glad that I finished out this series. This is one that I started last year and absolutely loved. The first 2 books were 5 stars, and then it kind of has progressively gone down since then, with this book being like my least favorite in the series. I still really enjoyed it. I still stand by the fact that this needs to be an HBO miniseries. Like each book could have its own season, it would be a whole thing, and I would enjoy the hell out of it. This series is kind of like a zombie story. They're not exactly zombies, but they have there's this virus that's going around, and if you get infected, then you're basically a zombie. I do think that it ended a little bit too nicely. It ended with less consequences, which will also be a problem later on in another Darcy book. That's my biggest complaint about it. Overall, this was a really good time. The world definitely expands from the first book, and it's a good series. This is my least favorite in this series though. And then I read books 3 and 4 in the Gravekeeper series. So The Twisted Dead is book 3, The Hollow Dead is book 4. I think this one's actually my favorite in the series, and then this one's probably my least favorite in the series. So The Twisted Dead takes place at this mansion. There is a character who is haunted by ghosts. Come to find out, it's actually the ghosts are attached to him, not necessarily to the house he's living at, and they are literally sucking the life from him. Because our main character can see ghosts and can kind of push them onto the other side, let them move on, she is trying to help them, even though this is way above her pay grade. She doesn't know what she's doing, but she tries. She's really trying. And the Gravekeeper series has a big story arc of our main character who has amnesia. She has no idea why she's in this town. She kind of woke up with no memory. She doesn't know who she was before moving to this town, and so The Hollow Dead kind of wraps up that story arc, or that big character arc. And so this one almost feels more thriller-esque than it does horror. Obviously it's still horror because there are ghosts and things like that, but we're really starting to figure out who the big bad was, as far as the people that were responsible for her losing her memory and why they were chasing her way back at the very beginning. This one is very action-packed. It's very quick. It is a pedal to the metal type of story, and honestly I needed that. It was the end of the week when I was reading it for, I think this one was Categorathon, and listen, I vlogged so much this month. I needed something quick, the ability to read super fast and like just have a good time with it. And that's exactly what this was. I am curious to see how she's going to move this series forward, because there is a book 5 that's coming out in February, I believe. And I feel like this series kind of wrapped up. We kind of left it open for like what can only be described as like a new season. So there will be this new big story arc. But this one I think really ended on a good note. And if you wanted to end here, I think you could. I also gave 4 stars to The Chain by Adrienne McKenty. This is a book that I actually just read last week for my most recent Trick or Treat Chooses My reading. And this is a book that has been on my TBR for literal years, okay? Like I'm pretty sure I moved this book to Utah. So that's how long it's been, because I moved here in 2018. This is a thriller, definitely got a psychological element to it. Our main character receives a phone call that her daughter has been kidnapped, and she, in order to get her daughter back, has to go kidnap another child and then becomes part of the chain. That person has to then just like kidnap another child, and then she gets her daughter back. It's a whole thing. No police can be involved. Like there's a lot of secrecy. There's a lot of like almost like a, you know, parental guilt, because she's really worried about the fact that like, you know, she shouldn't have even had her daughter at the bus stop. She should have picked her up from school, blah, blah, blah. And so there's this aspect of like trying to be a good mom, but then also like trying to do whatever is necessary to save her daughter regardless of the consequences. And this is very much a tale of 2 books. That little storyline kind of wraps up around the 50% mark. And then our main character is off on this quest to figure out who the start of the chain was. Who is calling the shots? And it very much kind of dived into like if Finlay Donovan went really dark. Finlay Donovan is like cozy and fun and quirky. This is like Finlay Donovan on dark mode. It also kind of like is remnant of The Collective, where like they're just like they're trying to be vigilantes. And while like I wasn't quite as interested in that part of it, I still kind of had a good time with it. My biggest complaint with this book is that I kind of figured out who the start of the chain is, the big bad. I figured out who they were like the first time we were introduced to them. That's unfortunate, but I just have to point something out, because this book has a really meta aspect to it that I absolutely loved. There is a mathematician in here that he is trying to figure things out, like using math and statistics and logic and things like that. And he makes an offhand comment that stories should always end at 77. Like that's a special number, a lucky number, whatever. And he said stories should always end at 77. And for that reason, like they couldn't sit at table 77, because this was the start of something, not the end of something. Anyways, I went and looked ahead to see if the author could have done the greatest thing possible, and he did. This book has 77 chapters. It's so cool. It's very meta. I don't know, I'm a nerd. But anyways, I enjoyed this. I am so glad that I read it. And like I said, it's been sitting on my shelf for literal years. And I've always been scared, because a lot of people, like they did say, they loved the first part and then they really hated the second part. And so I was just scared to read it. This was on a self-destruct list for this year. If I didn't read it, I was going to have to unhaul it. And I'm really glad that I got to it. I read The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim for the eyeball prompt of my seasonal spooky challenge. This is the weirdest book I've ever read, I think, because it starts out really slow. It is so literary, so slice of life. We are following our main character, who is like a high school student and a freshman in like a community college. Nothing seems to be going right. Her mother is dating this white guy who is like so racist, like very, very racist, because our main character is Korean American, and like he fetishizes Asian women. It's a whole thing. It's gross. We dive so deep into the weird psyche of this character, who is literally Googling, do blue eyes taste better than brown eyes? What do eyes taste like? And that is a question that I never wanted answers to. I know now what at least the author's interpretation of what eyes taste like and how they feel. It grosses me out just thinking about it right now. So yeah, this book, I think, like, get past the first half if you are reading this and you didn't necessarily love it, or you're kind of like contemplating DNFing it, because the first half of it does feel more like a literary fiction book, but the second half is so so bananas. I also think that if you like Rachel Harrison, if you like that literary horror, this is definitely going to be right up your alley. Lastly, I gave 4 stars to American Rapture by CJ Lead. This is a book that I read during Scatagorathon. It was actually the first book of the week. This one took a really interesting turn because I physically read it the first night because it didn't actually come out to the next day, so I couldn't get the audiobook or anything like that. And then I started annotating it. I started like quoting it, I started tabbing it, and like I ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff. And this, like, I ended up just physically reading this whole book. And I have not done that in a long time. Like, just sat and physically read a book without immersion reading something. This book is a dystopian nightmare. If you liked Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, this is a book that you'll also like. This is about this pandemic, this virus that's going around that, like, kind of think COVID on steroids, but instead of like getting a respiratory illness, you become like lust zombies. You basically have uncontrollable lust, which like is like a metaphor 100%, because this also deals with a lot of religious trauma. And there is this concept of how like men can't be trusted around women. They can't be like, they are not responsible for their actions, that it's, you know, it's because the women are wearing short skirts or whatever, which is dehumanizing to men in general, because it makes them like, you know, oh, you're just a sex zombie, whatever. You can't be, you know, held responsible. And this like literally just like kind of cranks that up to 10 and just makes it kind of absurd, which is an interesting way to look at religious horror and religious trauma, is when you make it so absurd, because it's not actually absurd as one might think, because there are definitely people that think like that. There were so many times where I was tabbing it and quoting it and going like, oh my gosh, I have a color here for the oh shit moments where I was just like, you know, jaw on the floor kind of thing. I talk about this a lot in my Scatagorathon vlog, so I'll link it up above if you want to check it out. Like, I read some of the quotes in here because it is bonkers, and I'm really glad that I read it. Moving on to my 4.5 star read, and that was The Carrow Hunt by Darcy Coates. So this is my favorite of the Darcy books that I read this month, which is funny because in my vlog where I was reading this, which was my trick or treat vlog, I actually started out by saying this is probably my least favorite Darcy that I had read in a long time, let alone this month. And then the way that it ended was just so smart. One of the criticisms that I had early on in the book was that the action of the book happened so fast, so that we really didn't get to know the huge cast of characters that we were involved with. But as we went along, especially as we got towards the end, it was very apparent why Darcy made that choice, in that we were only supposed to know what was going on from our main point of view character. Everything else kind of was unveiled, unraveled as we went along. And for that, like, I had to bump it up a star. The reason it wasn't a 5 star was because the ending. Just like in A Silence in the Shadows, this one ends in a way that everything gets undone. Everything serious, the high stakes, right, that we had, get undone by the end. I don't know, I just want more consequences in my books. I want things to, like, if something happens, I want it to, like, stay that way, because it makes me trust Darcy less in the future, because if there is ever a death of a character, or, you know, something bad happens, then I'll be like, it's fine, Darcy will undo it by the end. So it makes me care less going forward. But this was written so well, it was paced so well, and yeah, I had a good time with it. And no one is surprised by my 5 star, but that is Glow of the Everflame by Penn & Cole. This is the second book in the Kindred's Curse saga. Yes, I am obsessed with this series. I am obsessed. This is such a good balance of fantasy and romance. And the first book actually had like a lot of fantasy, very little romance, and this one definitely dialed up the romance aspect of it. There were times where I was just like squealing and kicking my feet, and they were so cute, and the banter was so there, which was the only thing that Spark was lacking. But at the same time, this has such a complex magic system. It has a complex world and a lot of like court politics, and there is this one house that doesn't like this house, and because of that, we have to be really careful when we're talking to this house, because then this house will be really mad. And it's a whole thing, and like, you know, we're on the brink of war, and we're just trying to keep people happy, but then also we're like trying to like get along with each other, because they don't like each other at the very beginning. They have to work together, but they're not happy about it. But we all know though that's going to end. And honestly, the ending of this book, I don't have time to read the third one. Okay, I don't have time. I need to read all of the stuff for the Goodreads Choice Awards. And the third book is really big, but we ended this book and I don't know if our characters are alive. They have to be. Our main characters have to be alive because there's 2 more books in this series. But like, I don't think that everybody is alive right now. I don't know, because the way that it ended was the biggest cliffhanger in the world. I've talked about how much I don't necessarily love the way romantasy series do that, where they end everything on a cliffhanger so you immediately pick up the book for next book. I understand it's a marketing technique. It's great as a content creator. It sucks because I want to binge a series and I don't have time to. So it's purely selfish. I know exactly why they're doing it. I'm still mad about it. If you see Heat of the Everflame on my November wrap up, I couldn't help myself. Those are the books that I read in the month of October. Let me know down in the comments below your favorite book of the month. If you're not feeling chatty, the fire emoji? That feels right. If you want to watch the vlogs where I talked about these books in depth, I will put links to them right here if you want to check them out. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Bye!